The smell of burning charcoal mixed with Jessica's cheap perfume hit me like a slap across the face as I walked into my brother's backyard. 23 family members scattered across the lawn, red Solo cups in hand, pretending this gathering wasn't about showing off who'd climbed highest on life's ladder since last summer. Jessica stood center stage near the grill, her bleached hair catching afternoon sunlight like a beacon of narcissism. My brother Mark flipped burgers behind her, oblivious to the performance his wife was orchestrating for our relatives. Some women just have that magic touch with relationships, Jessica announced to the circle of cousins surrounding her, her voice carrying that sickeningly sweet tone she reserved for public humiliation. They know how to keep a man interested, satisfied, committed. Every head turned toward me as I approached with my potato salad. The setup was obvious. Jessica had been planning this moment since I'd walked through the gate. But then there are other types of women, she continued, her eyes locking onto mine with predatory satisfaction. Women who just can't seem to hold on to anything good, no matter how many chances they get. Aunt Martha shifted uncomfortably. Cousin Dave suddenly found his beer fascinating. The entire family held their breath, waiting for the verbal execution they'd all seen coming. Jessica's smile widened as she delivered her killing blow. Some women just can't keep a man. The words hung in the air like smoke from the grill. 23 pairs of eyes bounced between Jessica's triumphant smirk and my face, waiting for tears, anger, or the usual retreat to my car that had become my signature move at family gatherings since David's death. Smiled. Not the polite, wounded smile I'd been wearing for 2 years. A real smile. The kind that made Jessica's confidence flicker like a candle in wind. I pulled out my phone with the casual confidence of someone holding 4 aces in a poker game rigged from the start. Speaking of keeping men, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent backyard, your husband sent me some very interesting messages last night. The phone screen glowed in the afternoon sun as I held it up for everyone to see. Jessica's face drained of color faster than water through a broken dam. In fact, I continued, watching her mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air, he's been sending me messages for quite a while now. Mark dropped his spatula. The burger patties sizzled forgotten on the grill as he stepped closer, squinting at my phone screen. "What the hell are you talking about, Emma?" he demanded. But his voice carried the tremor of a man who already suspected the answer would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. I turned the phone toward the family circle. Screenshot after screenshot of text messages filled the screen. Jessica's desperate attempts to grab my phone only confirmed what everyone could now see with their own eyes. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful." "Mark's working late again. Perfect timing." "I love you, Emma. I've always loved you." The messages were signed with a name that made every person in that backyard question their own sanity. David, my supposedly dead husband, the man this entire family had mourned, cried over, and helped me bury 2 years ago after that horrific car accident. The man whose life insurance payout had supposedly helped me move on and start fresh. Cousin Sarah grabbed onto her husband's arm for support. Uncle Pete's beer slipped from his fingers, shattering against the concrete patio. "That's impossible," Aunt Martha whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of sizzling meat and Jessica's panicked breathing. "David is dead. We went to the funeral. We saw the casket." I nodded solemnly, still holding the phone steady for all to see. "Yes, you did see a casket, and you did attend a funeral, but what you didn't know was that the man you buried wasn't my husband." The backyard erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped in confusion, disbelief, and growing anger as the implications began to sink in. Mark grabbed Jessica's wrist as she tried to push through the crowd toward the house. "Where do you think you're going?" he snarled, his grip tightening until she winced. "You're going to explain what the fuck is happening here." Jessica's mascara ran in dark rivers down her cheeks as she shook her head frantically. "It's not real. She's lying. She's making this up because she's jealous of what we have." But even as the words left her mouth, everyone could see the truth written across her face in bold, undeniable strokes. The guilty flush, the trembling hands, the way her eyes darted toward every possible escape route except the faces of the family members she'd just betrayed. Jealous? I laughed, and the sound carried genuine amusement for the first time in 2 years. Jessica, honey, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. I scrolled through more messages, each revelation hitting the family like physical blows. Messages coordinating secret meetings, messages planning elaborate lies about David's supposed business trips before his death, messages discussing money transfers and insurance claims and new identities. David's been alive this entire time, I announced, watching my brother's face cycle through every stage of grief in fast forward. Living in a rented apartment across town under the name Daniel Morrison, your wife has been his partner in more ways than one. Mark released Jessica's wrist and stepped backward, his face contorting with betrayal and rage. You're telling me my wife has been fucking my dead brother-in-law who isn't actually dead? Oh, it gets so much better than that, I promised, scrolling to a conversation thread that would shatter whatever remained of their world. They didn't just fake David's death for kicks. They had a very specific financial motivation. The life insurance payout, $800,000 that had supposedly helped the grieving widow rebuild her life. Money that had actually been split between my allegedly deceased husband and my brother's apparently sociopathic wife. The car accident was staged, I explained, watching realization dawn on face after face around the circle. David's friend Tony owed him money from some gambling debts. Tony agreed to disappear for a while in exchange for debt forgiveness. They put Tony's body in David's car and sent it over the guardrail on Highway 9. Silence fell over the backyard like a heavy blanket. Even the neighbors' dogs seemed to sense the gravity of what they were witnessing and stopped barking. Tony's family has been looking for him for 2 years, I continued relentlessly. His mother calls me sometimes, crying, asking if I've heard anything. His daughter just graduated high school. She had to walk across that stage, knowing her father vanished without a trace. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. How could you possibly know all this? The question I'd been waiting for. The moment when I could reveal the true scope of my preparation, my patience, and my absolute commitment to destroying everyone who had betrayed me. Because I've been working with Detective Morrison from the Fraud Division for 18 months, I said, pulling out my phone to show them a different conversation thread. Every text David sent me, every call, every secret meeting Jessica thought she was planning, all of it recorded, documented, and handed over to law enforcement. The detective's messages painted a picture of meticulous investigation. Surveillance photos of David and Jessica entering and leaving hotel rooms, bank records showing suspicious transfers, phone records proving ongoing communication between supposedly dead husbands and very much alive sisters-in-law. The FBI has been building a case for insurance fraud, identity theft, and accessory to Tony's murder, I announced. Jessica, sweetheart, you're not just a cheating wife, you're a federal criminal. Mark grabbed the phone from my hands, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through message after message of evidence. His wife's betrayal documented in excruciating detail. His dead brother-in-law's resurrection planned and executed with clinical precision. His entire life revealed as an elaborate lie designed to steal money and destroy lives. 2 years, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. 2 years I comforted you through your grief. 2 years I watched Emma struggle with loss while you sat at our dinner table pretending to care. Jessica's legs buckled. She collapsed onto one of the patio chairs, her perfectly manicured hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. But I wasn't finished. The best part, I said, raising my voice to ensure every family member heard the final revelation, is that David thinks I don't know about any of this. He thinks I'm the grieving widow who's slowly falling back in love with her mysteriously returned husband. I showed them the text messages I'd been sending back. Loving responses, excited plans to meet, promises of reconciliation and new beginnings. He thinks I'm meeting him tonight at the Riverside Motel, I explained. Room 237. He's expecting his devoted wife to fall into his arms, grateful that her beloved husband has miraculously returned from the dead. Cousin Dave leaned forward, his voice hoarse with disbelief. What's really happening tonight? Detective Morrison and his team will be waiting in the next room, I replied, along with Tony's mother, who deserves to know what happened to her son, and a camera crew from Dateline, because apparently this story is too good for just local news coverage. The family stood frozen in a tableau of shock and betrayal. Uncle Pete bent over to pick up his shattered beer bottle, moving like a man in a trance. Aunt Martha clutched her pearls so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Mark walked over to his wife, who was still sobbing into her hands, and placed one hand gently on her shoulder. "Look at me," he said quietly. Jessica raised her tear-streaked face, hope flickering in her eyes that maybe, somehow, her husband might find a way to forgive the unforgivable. Instead, Mark's voice turned cold as winter. "Pack your shit and get out of my house. You've got 1 hour before I call the police myself." But Jessica wasn't giving up without a fight. She stood up abruptly, her tears transforming into desperate rage. "You can't prove any of this," she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "This could all be fake. She could have made up those text messages. She's been jealous of me since the day Mark and I got engaged." The accusation hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before I played my ace card. I dialed a number on my phone and put it on speaker. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered, tinged with anticipation and desire. "Emma? Baby, is that you? Are you ready for tonight? I've been waiting so long to hold you again." David's voice. Alive, unmistakable, and completely unaware that he was speaking to an audience of 23 family members who had mourned his death for 2 years. "Hi, David," I said sweetly into the phone. "I'm here with the whole family at Mark and Jessica's barbecue. Would you like to say hello?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for an eternity, then barely audible. "Oh, fuck." "That's right, baby," I continued, my voice dripping with false affection. "Everyone's here. Mark's here. Jessica's here. All the cousins and aunts and uncles who cried at your funeral. They're all very excited to hear your voice again. Emma, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I interrupted. "Why don't you start by explaining to your brother why you've been fucking his wife for the past 3 years? And then maybe you can explain to Tony's mother why her son had to die so you could collect insurance money." Click, the line went dead. The backyard remained silent except for the sound of Jessica's renewed sobbing and the distant wail of sirens growing closer. "I called the police 20 minutes ago," I announced to the stunned faces surrounding me. "They should be here any moment to arrest Jessica for fraud conspiracy. David will be picked up at his apartment shortly after." Mark stared at me with something approaching awe. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was wrong 3 months after the funeral," I admitted. "David's death never made sense. He was the most careful driver I knew, but suddenly he's flying off a mountain road in perfect weather. The insurance company asked too many questions. The body was too badly burned for proper identification. And Jessica started acting different." I looked directly at my sister-in-law, who had stopped crying and was staring at me with undisguised hatred. "You made mistakes, Jessica. Little ones at first. You knew things about David's last days that you shouldn't have known. You mentioned conversations that supposedly happened while he was on that business trip. But the hotel records showed he never checked in. You got sloppy because you thought I was too grief-stricken to pay attention." The sirens were getting louder. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees as police cars turned into the neighborhood. "But the real mistake," I continued, "was underestimating how much I loved my husband. Not enough to forgive him for faking his own death and destroying innocent lives, but enough to make sure he paid for every single lie." 3 police cars pulled up to the curb. Detective Morrison stepped out of the first vehicle, his face grim but satisfied. Behind him came 2 uniformed officers and a woman I recognized from the photos I'd been shown. Tony's mother, 58 years old, gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded photograph of her missing son pinned to her jacket like a badge of honor. "Mrs. Chen," I called out to her as the officers approached the backyard. "I promised you'd get answers about Tony. These are the people who killed your son." Jessica tried to run. She made it exactly 4 steps before Officer Rodriguez tackled her to the ground next to the grill, her white sundress staining with charcoal dust and her own tears. "Jessica Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, accessory to murder, and identity theft," Detective Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the backyard with official authority. As the handcuffs clicked around Jessica's wrists, she looked up at me with pure venom in her eyes. "You destroyed my entire life," she hissed. "No," I replied calmly, watching the officers lead her toward the police car. "You destroyed Tony's life. You destroyed his family's life. You destroyed my life, and Mark's life, and the lives of everyone who loved and missed David for 2 years. I just made sure you couldn't destroy anyone else's." The second police car was already heading across town to arrest David at his apartment. The third car waited to transport Jessica to the county jail, where she would spend the next several hours being processed and photographed and fingerprinted like the criminal she had always been. Detective Morrison approached me with a satisfied nod. "Miss Patterson, I have to say, your cooperation in this investigation was extraordinary. Without your willingness to play along with David's messages, we never would have gathered enough evidence for conviction." "It wasn't easy," I admitted, watching my brother comfort Tony's mother as she finally learned the truth about her son's disappearance. "Pretending to still love someone who betrayed you so completely, it required more acting ability than I knew I possessed." "The district attorney believes we have enough evidence for life sentences," Detective Morrison continued. "The premeditated nature of Tony's murder, combined with the insurance fraud and the elaborate cover-up, means they'll both be facing decades in federal prison." As the police cars pulled away with Jessica in custody, the remaining family members began to process what they had just witnessed. Conversations started quietly, then grew louder as the shock wore off and anger took its place. "I can't believe she sat at our Christmas dinner," Aunt Martha said, her voice shaking with rage. "She ate our food and hugged our children and pretended to care about our lives while she was stealing from us the entire time." "We all loved David," Uncle Pete added, crushing his replacement beer can in his fist. "We mourned him, we celebrated his life, we supported Emma through the worst grief imaginable, and the whole time he was alive and laughing at us." Cousin Dave shook his head in disgust. "What kind of person fakes their own death? What kind of person kills an innocent man and puts his family through years of wondering what happened?" "The kind of person who values money more than human life," I answered, finally allowing myself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for 18 months of careful investigation and emotional performance. Mark walked over to me, his face still pale with shock but his eyes clear with newfound respect. "Emma, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For the past 2 years I watched you struggle with David's death, and I never suspected, I never imagined." "You couldn't have known," I assured him. "They were very good at their deception. If I hadn't started noticing Jessica's slip-ups, they might have gotten away with it forever." "What happens now?" he asked. I looked around the backyard at my family, my real family, the people who had supported me through genuine grief and confusion and loss, the people who had never betrayed my trust or murdered innocent strangers for money. "Now we heal," I said. "Now we remember Tony Martinez as the victim he was instead of the missing person he became. Now we help his family get justice and closure. And now we move forward knowing that the people who matter, the people who are worth loving and trusting, are the ones still standing here with us." Detective Morrison returned from his car with a folder full of paperwork. "Miss Patterson, there are a few more forms we need you to sign, and the FBI will want to debrief with you early next week. You'll also need to testify at both trials, probably sometime next spring." "I'll be there," I promised. "Tony's family deserves to see justice done properly." As the detective handed me the paperwork, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. For a moment, my heart stopped, thinking David might be trying to contact me again from wherever the police had taken him. Instead, the message was from Dateline producer Sarah Chen, Tony's older sister, as it turned out. "Emma, thank you for giving us the exclusive on this story. Mom finally has closure about Tony, and the world will know what kind of monsters David and Jessica really are. The episode airs in 6 weeks. You're a hero. A hero. The word felt strange applied to me. For 2 years, I had felt like a victim, a widow, a woman who couldn't keep her husband alive or happy or faithful. For 18 months, I had felt like a detective, a performer, a chess player moving pieces into position for maximum damage. But a hero? Someone who saved lives and brought justice and protected innocent people from predators? Maybe Sarah was right. The sun was setting behind the trees as I finished signing the police paperwork. The barbecue that had started as Jessica's stage for my public humiliation had transformed into the scene of her complete destruction. The family members who had gathered to witness my shame had instead become witnesses to the most elaborate revenge plot in our family's history. Mark started cleaning up the abandoned food and scattered beer cans, moving with the mechanical precision of someone trying to process trauma through familiar tasks. "Leave it," I told him. "I'll help you clean up tomorrow. Tonight you need to process what just happened to your life." He nodded gratefully, then paused with a handful of paper plates. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you first suspected David was alive, why didn't you just call the police immediately? Why did you play along with their plan for so long?" I considered the question carefully. The answer involved more darkness than I usually allowed myself to acknowledge. "Because I wanted them to suffer," I said honestly. "If I had called the police immediately, they might have gotten lighter sentences. They might have claimed David's death was an accident, that Tony's body was mistaken identity, that the insurance money was just a fortunate coincidence. But by letting them dig themselves deeper, by gathering months of evidence of their ongoing deception and betrayal," I gestured toward the now empty driveway where the police cars had been parked. "Now they're facing murder charges instead of fraud charges. Now there's no possibility of plea bargains or reduced sentences. Now Tony's family gets real justice instead of legal technicalities." Mark stared at me with something approaching fear. "That's incredibly calculating." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And I'm not sure if that makes me a hero or a monster, but I know it makes me someone who doesn't let killers and thieves destroy innocent lives without consequences." As the last of the family members said their goodbyes and headed to their cars, I found myself alone in the backyard, with the lingering smell of charcoal and the echo of Jessica's screams as the police led her away. My phone buzzed again. This time the message was from Detective Morrison. David was arrested without incident at his apartment, found $300,000 in cash hidden in his bedroom wall, plus fake identification documents for 3 different identities. This is going to be a federal case for sure. Thank you for your patience with this investigation. $300,000. Half of the insurance money that was supposed to help me rebuild my life after losing my husband. Money that had been stolen not just from the insurance company, but from Tony's family, who had never received any compensation for their loss. I typed back, "Make sure Tony's mother gets every penny when this is over. She deserves something good to come from this nightmare." Already in the works, the insurance company is cooperating fully with victim restitution. I slipped my phone back into my purse and took one last look around the backyard where everything had changed, where Jessica's cruelty had finally backfired in the most spectacular way possible, where 2 years of grief and investigation and careful planning had culminated in perfect, devastating justice. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a world where my husband was alive but dead to me forever, where my sister-in-law was in jail awaiting trial for murder, where my brother was discovering that his entire marriage had been built on lies and betrayal. But tonight, I would go home to my quiet house and sleep peacefully for the first time since David's supposed death, because the woman who couldn't keep a man had just proven that she could definitely destroy the people who betrayed her. And sometimes that was so much better. The drive home took me past the Riverside Motel, where David had been expecting to reunite with his supposedly devoted wife. Room 237 was dark now, its occupant in custody, its purpose transformed from romantic rendezvous to crime scene evidence. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house I had shared with David for 8 years of marriage. The house where we had planned our future, celebrated anniversaries, and built what I thought was an unbreakable bond. The house where he had planned his own death and my destruction. But it was my house now, truly mine, paid for with honest work and legitimate grief, not stolen insurance money and murdered strangers. Tomorrow I would start redecorating. I would erase every trace of David Martinez and the lies we had lived together. I would build something new and honest and real. As I unlocked my front door, my phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Hello? Ms. Patterson? This is Maria Martinez, Tony's mother. My breath caught. I had seen her at the arrest, had spoken to her briefly, but hearing her voice now, alone in my dark house, felt like a sacred moment. Mrs. Martinez, how are you holding up? I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice thick with tears. For 2 years I have wondered what happened to my son. I have had nightmares about him suffering, about him being lost and alone. Now I know the truth. It is terrible, but it is better than not knowing. I'm so sorry for your loss, I said, meaning every word. Tony didn't deserve what happened to him. No one deserved to be used like that. The detective told me you worked very hard to catch these people, that you risked your own safety to get evidence. I did what anyone would do. No, she said firmly. Most people would have called the police and hoped for the best. You made sure justice was done properly. You made sure my son's death mattered. We talked for another 10 minutes about Tony, about justice, about the long road ahead to healing. When we finally hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. Peace. Not the false peace of ignorance or denial, but the real peace that comes from knowing the truth, facing it fully, and choosing to build something better from the wreckage. I walked through my house, turning on lights in every room, claiming every space as my own. In the bedroom I had shared with David, I packed away the last of his belongings, clothes he would never wear again, books he would never read again, photographs of a man who had chosen to become a stranger. In the kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table where David and I had eaten breakfast together on the morning he disappeared forever, where he had kissed me goodbye and promised to call when he arrived safely at his business meeting. The last honest kiss we had ever shared, though I hadn't known it at the time. My laptop sat on the counter, still open to the browser tab, where I had researched Tony Martinez's disappearance for the 100th time, still displaying the missing person report that had helped me understand the true scope of David and Jessica's crime. I closed the laptop and finished my tea, then headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring reporters and lawyers and FBI interviews. It would bring the beginning of a very public trial where I would have to relive every detail of my husband's betrayal in front of strangers with cameras. But tonight was mine. Tonight, I was a woman who had kept the most important promise anyone can make, the promise to stand up for innocent people who cannot stand up for themselves. Tonight, I was a woman who had proven that some betrayals are too expensive to forgive. And tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I was not a widow. I was a survivor. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Jessica's final words to me. You destroyed my entire life. She was right, of course. I had destroyed her life completely and irreversibly. But as I settled into peaceful sleep, I felt no guilt about that destruction. Because some lives deserve to be destroyed. And some women are strong enough to do the destroying. The last thing I remembered before sleep took me was the sound of Jessica's voice earlier that afternoon, so confident and cruel. Some women just can't keep a man. She was right about that too. But she had underestimated what those women could do to the people who took their men away.